Welcome to today's episode of Make It Work. I am your host, Ochuba Okam Ochuba. Make It Work is your regular program, and here we handle issues about how to make it in your relationship, marriage, leadership, business, career, organization, whatever it is that you set your mind to achieve. So we provide the know-how on how you can make it work. And so I want to welcome you to today's episode once again. Today we shall be dealing with the topic that says how to make your spouse think like you. How to make your spouse think like you. Now you will agree with me that many people who are in marriage or people that are in relationships always struggle in making sure that the next person, either their spouse or the person they're in a relationship with or the person they are working with, gets to think like them. Bosses will hire staff, and all through the process of training, the essence is for these people to begin to think like their bosses or begin to think like the owners of the business. In marriage is not different. The man wants the wife to think like him, and the woman wants the husband to think like her. And people are in relationship, they want the other person to think like them. So these are efforts. And in the Bible, we have example of husband and wife that we are thinking alike. As it has to do with positive thinking, because it's possible that the man would want the woman to think like him, or the woman wanting the man to think like her in a negative sense. It could also come up in a positive sense. So from the positive point of view, in Acts of the Apostle chapter 18, reading from 24 to 26, you discover a man called Ananias and the wife Sapphira. Now, these people agreed together to sell a portion of land and then agreed on the amount that they were going to be disclosing. Eventually they did, and it backfired because each of them lost their lives. So that is thinking alike in a negative sense. Even in our time, you see husband and wife agreeing together, thinking alike, that produce some negativities, including aborting the children or the aborting pregnancies for their children. It also led to a lot of negative things. But in Make It Work, we don't emphasize the negativities, but we'll show you how it's possible for a man and a woman in a relationship, in marriage, to be able to think alike. And that will help the relationship to work. In Acts of the Apostle chapter 5, reading from verse 1 to verse 11, we see Priscilla and Aquila, husband and wife, who had a young person that was preaching and teaching in the church. And at the end of the day, they take the person home, teach the person, and prepare the person to do better. So husband and wife can agree together to mold destinies, impact positively in the life of leaders, in the life of teachers, in the life of people who have potentials in going far in life. So how do you make your spouse to think like you? The first way to make your spouse to think like you is to build deep friendship with your spouse. Now this is very important because many people do not understand the place and the relevance of making their spouse to think like them, and then they go about it in a very odd means. But if you can build deep friendship with your spouse, if you can build deep friendship with your spouse, before you know it, the person will begin to think like you. So this is very, very important. So build deep friendship. Make sure that your wife or your husband is your friend. Deepen your friendship with your spouse. Deepen your friendship with whoever you are in a relationship with. You're already on your way to making the person think like you. Now, do you agree with me that when people become friends, as their relationship deepens, they begin to think alike? So deepen your friendship with your spouse. Deepen your friendship with the person you are in a relationship with. Again, cultivate the habit of spending time together. When you cultivate the habit of spending time together, you discover that over time, you begin to reason together. So the more you spend time together, the more you rub off on each other. Over time, the person's behavior will be traceable to you, and your behavior will be traced to the person. So because you have started reasoning together, you have started thinking together. So it's important that you spend time together. Now, a couple that spend time together always think alike. Now, thirdly, you need to also begin to talk more often. Now, the more you talk with somebody, the more you begin to share views, adjust your views, review your views, and then jettison some views that are not consistent. So talk more, talk often. When you spend more time in talking, you are opening your spirit to the person. So you need to talk more. So talking more is important, friends, and it's very, very necessary that you begin to talk more with your spouse, talk more with your friend, talk more with whoever you want to begin to think like you. It's also obtainable in your relationship with your children, parenting. When you want your child to think like you as a father or as a mother, please talk more without child. The more you discuss with your son, your daughter, the more you discuss with your children, the more they get to think like you. Because most of the things you say to them, they will begin to imbibe them, they will begin to assimilate them, and then it will now form part of their thought system. So have a way of talking with your children, talking with your spouse, talking with your workers. If you have employees and you want them to come to the level of intellectual mindset with you, it's important that you talk with them often. The more you talk with them, the more you implant your spirit into them. Again, the fourth way to make your spouse, your friend, your children, or your colleague, or your employee, or anyone to think like you is to plan together more often. When you plan together with someone, whether it's your spouse, your children, your colleague, your employee, or anybody you want to begin to think like you, when you plan more with a person, and each of the time you have something to plan, business, family, and all that, and the person is part of the planning, you discover that the more you share ideas in the planning process, the more the person begins to develop, the capacity to think like you. So plan together more often. Then you also need to begin to build a team in your spouse, build a team in your children, build a team in your colleague, build a team in your friend, build a team in your employee. If there is anyone you want to make to be able to think like you, it's important that you make the person part of your team. Yes, build a team, create a team with the person, and also create a team out of the person. So you can make anyone think like you by making sure the person is your team and actually part of your team. Again, you also, friends, you need to enter into the spirit of whoever that you want to begin to think like you. If it's your spouse, enter into the spirit of your spouse. If it's your children, if it's your colleague, or your employee or your trainee, anyone you want, or your student, anyone you want to begin to think like you, enter into the spirit of the person. By entering into the spirit of the person, you think like the person, you think for the person, and you think the thoughts of the person. So you begin to think for the person, what the person could have thought on behalf of the person. In the process, you have entered into the person's spirit. You begin to see the world like the person, and that will help you to begin to implant your own way of thinking into the person, because you now understand the way the person thinks. So you need to work out to understand how the person thinks first by entering into the person's spirit, and then you begin to now download the way you think into the person. And finally, the law of empathy. You may not possibly make anyone think like you unless you have put yourself in the shoes of the person. That's the law of empathy. The law of empathy deals with you putting yourself in the shoes of the person. So if you want your children to think like you, so put yourself in the shoes of your children. Empathize with them. If it's your spouse, put yourself in the shoes of your spouse. No. Stop looking at it just from your own point of view and begin to loosen up to begin to see it from the point of view of your children, from the point of view of your spouse, from the point of view of your friend, from the point of view of your employee. If you have a student, if you have a trainee, and you want the person to begin to think like you, it's important that you put yourself into the shoes of the person. That is the law of empathy. Making sure that you don't just look at life from your own perspective, you also consider their perspective. Now watch this. When you put yourself in someone's shoes, it's easier to understand the person. And the moment you put yourself in someone's shoes and understand the person, it is easier for you to transport your own thought into the person because you've understood the person. So gradually you can sell your thoughts into the person because you have understood the strongholds and the grip on the person. And then by that, with the transportation of your own thoughts into the person, the person's walls are now being fragile, are now being under some kind of watch. You see a work is being done on it, and then you see that the wall is cracking. The person's wall of defense is coming down. The person is laying down the person's guard. The person is bringing down what the person thought, what the person had known, what the person felt was working, and then the person will gradually begin to embrace yours because you first entered into the person's spirit, brought down the person's guard, and then transport your own views, your thought system, your thought pattern, and begin to implant it in the person. In the process, by the time the person will realize what he or she is doing, the person would have started thinking like you. I want you to understand that you can make anyone think like you. Anyone. And one of the ways to get the people do what you want them to do, achieve results in life, even in working with you or in any relationship, is to make them think like you. And it's very possible. And in today's episode, we'll be able to run through how you can possibly make anyone think like you. And I believe that as you begin to make use of this, you can make anyone to think like you. Thank you so much for being part of today's episode. I invite you to join us in the coming episodes. I remain your host, Ochoba Okam Ochoba. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.